Well, thank you again for joining our University of Minnesota Extension Agrivoltaics webinar series. This is the last webinar for this series. If you've been joining us the whole time, you've seen a webinar on cattle solar grazing research. We also had a panel on sheep solar grazing, and then some research on forages growing under solar panels, as well as a project team on row crop production under solar panels. And all of those webinars have been recorded and are available on our YouTube page. We will share a link to that playlist towards the end of the webinar. But we thank you for joining our webinar tonight, and we're excited to have two wonderful speakers and experts in the field of agrivoltaics who will share their broad experiences with many different forms of agriculture production underneath solar panels, and their great work trying to spread this type of production system across the country. So thank you all for joining. My name is Sabrina Florentino, and I am the Alternative Livestock Systems Extension Educator with the University of Minnesota. I did my master's degree in agrivoltaics with Dr. Brad Hines, who has been a pioneer in the field, working on cattle solar grazing and other projects in the realm of agrivoltaics. So he is with us today. So tonight's speakers, we are very excited to have with us Byron Kominek and Peter Schmitt. So Byron is the owner and manager of Jack's Solar Garden, as well as the executive director of the Colorado Agrivoltaic Learning Center in Longmont, Colorado. He is a former U.S. diplomat with the U.S. Agency for International Development, having served in Zambia and Mozambique to enhance natural resource management of forests and wildlife. Byron serves as Boulder County Planning Commissioner and a board member of Visit Longmont. His educational background consists of a bachelor's degree in biomedical engineering and a master's in environmental engineering. Byron speaks French and Portuguese and raises sheep and waterfowl, grows hundreds of berry bushes, and volunteers for a local Boy Scout troop. With us tonight also, we have Peter Schmitt, who is the Director of Project Development, focusing on U.S. Solar's grid-scale developments across the country, ranging from 50 to 300 plus megawatts each. He also spearheads the company's agrivoltaic innovations, including the advancement of pollinator seed mixes, crop production underneath and around solar arrays, beehives, and the introduction of sheep to sites. Prior to joining U.S. Solar, Peter worked as an internal consultant at Xcel Energy in transmission, worked for a public utility in Austria, and founded a commercial compost company. Peter grew up in Minnesota and received 2 undergraduate and 2 graduate degrees, all from the University of Minnesota. So we have 2 very interesting and 2 individuals with wide-ranging experience that we're very excited to hear from today. We will start with Byron, who will share a little bit more about his agrivoltaic work, and we will have Byron pull up his slides now.
Looks like we're good, yeah? All right, start my timer. Hi, folks. I'm Byron Kominek, owner and manager of Jack's Solar Garden, and I operate the Colorado Agrivoltaic Learning Center. Today, I'm going to talk about agrivoltaics a la Jack's Solar Garden. Everything that we talk about today, this is how we've done it. Doesn't mean how you have to do it. There's lots of different ways to do agrivoltaics, but the most important thing to keep in mind is that you got to plan for it, you got to design for it, and then you have to have proper construction practices in place so that you can build for it. You get those things in order, and then you have opportunity to work with folks around you. All right, so first, come on now. It all starts back with Grandpa Jack. That's a picture of that old fella there in the top middle. I never met the guy. He bought my family's land in 1972. He was a farmer half his life. And before that, he was a carpenter. But everything starts with having a farmer that own some farmland, and then the kids can have access to it, and eventually grandkids. I moved out to my family's farm here in Longmont, Colorado, back in 2016 after my life overseas, trying to figure out what the hell else I was going to do with my life, and started learning more about haying and how haying doesn't pay anything, and we should stop it. Essentially, haying 24 acres in Boulder County, we were losing money on it on an annual basis. Why keep doing it? So we needed to figure out something else to do. And the idea for Jack's Solar Garden was born. And somewhere between 2017 and 2018. 2017, I had the idea of want to put solar on the land because that's a nice passive income. And then having a beer with Greg Barron Gafford at the University of Arizona and Jordan Machnick of the National Renewable Energy Laboratory in February of 2018. And it was a pretty terrible beer. They told me about agrivoltaics and the opportunities to keep the land active. Colorado State University had an active agrivoltaic site that they had just built the year before, I believe, in Fort Collins, which is just an hour north of me. And they were having a field day in the spring of 2018 that my mother, who owns my land still, she went to, and she was like, oh, okay, this is interesting. I like this concept of agrivoltaics, because before that, she was always, oh, I don't want solar. I don't want this. I don't want change on my land. Just want to keep it farmland. And so having actually had a project nearby that she could see helped her change her mind and allow for Jack's Solar Garden to occur. So let me bring you all out here to Jack's Solar Garden. We have 3 pastures. There's this 8-acre north pasture, 6-acre east pasture, south pasture is also 8 acres. The other 2 pastures, I still hay one field. I don't make money on it, but at least I have food for my sheep over the course of the winter time. And the rest of the time I manage my sheep across the land. But we're going to focus in on this 8 acres north pasture. Back 2019, I was figuring out how to have the business of Jack's Solar Garden. 2020 was figuring out all the financing of it. And everybody remember what was going on during 2020, right? If you don't, maybe Wikipedia can help you. But that's when we started to pull out our construction material. So June of 2020, all of these steel I-beams, there's over 2,400 steel I-beams embedded on my north pasture. They started to get knocked into place. It took 3 days to put in 2,400 of them. There was just a constant little ding, 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 ding from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. getting it done. We put up 3,276 solar panels, elevated at a couple different heights. A third of our property has 8-foot flat panels, leading edge being down to 5'6", and the other portion of the solar array is flat at 6'6" with a leading edge down to 4 feet. And that's the makeup of the field, and that created this 1.2 megawatt DC 960 kilowatt AC single axis tracking community solar garden. Let's watch it turn. So this is just over the course of a week, and hopefully what you get to see from this is that there is sun and shade hitting every single part of the field. Nowhere gets full sun, nowhere gets full shade. That's the importance of single axis tracking systems, especially in drier climates where a little bit of shade can go a long way in keeping moisture in the ground and reducing thermal temperatures for various types of vegetation that I'm about to talk to. But our friends here in Minnesota wanted me to chat a little bit more on the farmer side too. Well, we started working with some folks from Sprout City Farms to create a 2-acre vegetable plot underneath our solar panels. This was taking our hay field that now had solar panels on it, and we did not grade the property. Oh my God, do not grade the property. That is a way to destroy the land very quickly and make it hard to have vegetation grow thereafter. We were able to create crop beds for the vegetables. And let's see, here you can see the different, or the same machine going up and down the rows. When you see the panels facing to the west, I could drive on the east side of it. When the panels were tilted to the east, I could drive on the west side of it. A lot of times I hear from people either in the solar industry or the agricultural industry or researchers being like, oh, let's play with the solar panels. Let's like make them go vertical. Let's go all these different funky directions so that we can have larger vehicles going through. No, the panels, like I didn't turn them at all. Like I kept them in perfect production because I was trying to maximize my energy production. So as they turned throughout the day, I just managed how I was driving across the field. It's something that's pretty easy to do. I had 31 rows of solar panels, easy to move around in that space. We set drip tape. Any agricultural operation needs to have water access. You can either have it buried lines, which is what I would recommend, but we had above ground lines tapped into a local fire hydrant, set up drip lines to be able to grow a world of different types of veggies. You name the market garden vegetable, we've grown it underneath solar panels here at Jack Solar Garden, from carrots, tomatillos, tomatoes, eggplant, garlic, squash, beans, turnips, radishes, beautiful peppers. Onions do amazing underneath the solar panels. More peppers, even okra there. But, you know, just seeing some of these pictures doesn't always make sense. So we got this little phone video, so you can even see sweet corn growing down the middle of the solar panels. It's there. Well, that video doesn't work out as well for y'all. Hopefully other videos do. But hopefully that gives you a sense that there's space for cabbage, corn, all these different things. It's figuring out how to match the height and the size of the solar of the vegetation of the livestock that you want to have within a solar array to match it with your energy production. Oftentimes people think that I got a world of grants to be able to build the solar array and that we lost a ton of money to be able to build the solar array to have our agricultural activities put in place. Absolutely not. For the energy nerds out there, it was $1.39 per watt for construction for this 1.2 megawatt solar array. Even putting the panels up just a little bit higher after development cost, that was $1.60 a watt. We were working to optimize energy production because we had been losing money on the farm. There would have been no point in building this so that we would lose more money off of energy production. It was building it so we could optimize energy production and then figure out how can we continue to use this space within the solar array for agricultural production. But you just have to do that planning, designing, and building so that you're still able to use that space within the solar array. I love to harp on that, as that's even the second time I've mentioned that in my presentation. Probably be another third time or so. Love growing raspberries in the solar array. Maybe 3, 4, shoot, oh my gosh, time flies. 4.5 years ago, planted raspberries underneath the solar panels because I'd seen a site in the Netherlands where they had planted raspberries on a 2 megawatt site, and it was really cool looking. So I was like, cool, let's give it a try. Let's put in a section of raspberries and watch them grow. And they grew quite well, and they grew quite well without supplemental irrigation. Like, raspberries are almost a weed, so it was wonderful to have them out there. And we learned a few fun things about about raspberries out there. One of those things is that when a soft frost comes through, and that happens in the early fall, that can knock out the raspberry production outside of the solar array. So these two pictures here were just taken 2 minutes apart. The raspberries on the left-hand side are outside of the solar array. The raspberries on the right side are underneath the solar panel, or within the solar array, as you can see there. A soft frost had come through maybe 2 nights before, and that was enough to make all of my raspberry canes outside of the solar array go dormant. Whereas you can see on the right-hand side, those raspberries are still continuing to grow quite well. What's happening is at night, the panels are stowed flat. Earth is irradiating heat. It backs up back onto the plants, and it can be up to 2 degrees Celsius warmer at night in the fall. That can help stave off those soft freezes. So 2 degrees Celsius, what's that, like 3 to 4 Fahrenheit, something along those lines. If it gets down to 30 degrees at night, it's not enough to knock out the berry production. There was even tomatoes growing in the solar array where they were close to 5 feet tall, and it was only the top 6 inches of the tomato plants that froze, and the rest of the plants were fine. So there's these different microclimates that can help support not just vegetable production, but also perennial production. And sneak peek here, raspberries are going to be what we move towards in the future. So this is our last season of growing vegetables at Jack Solar Garden. Next year, we are shifting into berry production so that we can have a U-pick. Having labor is expensive, especially in Boulder County, Colorado. Having an opportunity to have other people pay you to do the work for you, all the better. So we'll be hopefully working with Colorado State University to study raspberries, blackberries, potentially hazelnuts, and maybe gooseberries within the solar array over the coming years. So that'll be fun to showcase in the future. Back on the veggie side, we've worked with researchers to learn more about how these different vegetables grow in the different microclimates that we provide to them. One bed getting morning sun, one bed getting midday sun, another bed getting afternoon sunlight. And with our outer beds getting, our east and west bed getting 50% of daily sunlight and the middle bed getting 70% of daily sunlight, these microclimates have an impact on how the different crops grow. And not just crops, but within each varietal of each crop grows differently within the solar array. And University of Arizona, as pictured here, has been studying how like 4 different varieties of garlic grow within our solar array in those different microclimates to better understand which microclimate does each varietal of each crop do best. Because if we can figure that out, why would we ever plant it anywhere else? It makes a lot of sense that way. And that can help save effort on the farmer's time of cultivating crops in spaces where they just don't grow well, and you cultivate them in the places where they do really well. Harping on the different microclimates, this is a video that you can find on our website that just is a one-day time lapse where you can see that bed on the west-hand side is getting sunlight now, then the middle bed gets midday, and then the afternoon sunlight's going to hit that east bed. The panels also redistribute moisture. So oftentimes we get our rainfall in the afternoons in Colorado when, as these panels are just tilting to the west now, that's when we would get rainstorms. And so that eastern bed that's getting direct sunlight at the moment, that's getting an extra dump of water throughout the middle of the summer. And we can see the impact of having additional moisture in the ground around the vegetables or perennials out there. Our researchers love to remind us that Colorado is not light limited. We're water limited. People move here because we have light. People leave here because we don't have as much water. This gem of a woman, Amy Marble, has been monitoring the varieties of crops for University of Arizona for years, and she's been learning about the different flavor profiles. Even if you plant the same varietal of a crop in each of those 3 different microclimates, you will taste a difference between them, and that's fascinating to see. It's been a lot of fun working with her over the years, and she really benefits. You can see her wearing a hat there, but also notice that she's working in the shade. Farmer health is really important within agrivoltaic systems. It's important to build a solar array so that farmers are not engaging with wires on a regular basis, 1. And 2, the farmers can plan their days around where the shade is going to be. When it's over 100 degrees, you want to work in the shade. They want to work in the shade. And having solar panels elevated to a point where it's easier for them to access that shade, all the better. We work with folks at Colorado State University to learn more about our grasslands in the solar array. One of the fun things that they've been learning more about is how does the grass growth change year by year dependent on our rainfall. We found on an average year, we lose about 5% of our overall grass growth within the solar array. That'd be, if you remember back to school days, 95% on a test. I'd feel pretty good about that. So not an issue. On a really wet year within the solar array, or within our area, we found that we lost close to 12% of the grass growth within the around our solar panels versus outside the solar array. And 88%, I was a B student. I think I'd still be okay with 88%. On a really dry year, last year was one of the driest years since 1900. We got an additional 20% growth of grass underneath and around our solar panels versus outside. That's 120% on the test. I'd feel pretty damn good about that. If we put it into rancher context, if you had on a rainy year, everywhere is doing great. And so there's no real concern about where you're going to find forage. But on a dry year, everywhere is doing poorly except the solar array. And now you have access to additional grass. On a wet year, everybody can buy hay, it's cheap. On a dry year, hay prices are going up. So fun to think about where you're going to find your better grasses, more quantity of it, depending on whether your climate is going to get hotter and drier like we are, or if you're going to get cooler and wetter. We like to showcase what's possible. We're working with a farmer that's putting chickens out in the solar array. Like egg prices have been crazy. There's people that are willing to pay more dollars per dozen for free range chickens. And so this fella is trying to figure out how to have chickens within a solar array in a functional way. Sheep grazing has been pretty common within solar arrays. We've grazed sheep out there. They're pretty easy. It's always fun to see how they just camp out around the steel I-beams and pass out there. But we really talk about the future of this being cattle. I'm sure Brad is smiling at that one, even though you're off screen there. But cows within a solar array, like the majority of our country. Let me start this over. We have 95 million cows in the U.S. There's about 5 million sheep. People look at most menus and see beef on the menu. They don't see lamb on the menu. Colorado is a cow state, and as is much of the western part of the United States, where the solar assets are most appropriate. So figuring out how we can integrate cattle within solar array will be a boon to the solar industry for being able to access more land, for being able to talk across the aisle, to help bring in more partners on how can we have rangeland where we have solar panels that provide shade protection to our animals, both during the summertime. And recently a rancher was even more excited about having his cows within a solar array during the wintertime because of the wind protection for the animals. So fascinating to hear about all the potential of having different types of cows in solar arrays. The first ones I showed you were red Angus beef cattle. These ones are dairy cows. We work with a local fellow from a dairy that he brings out his cows whenever we have workshops. So if you want to do a workshop at Jack's Solar Garden, you can pay us and we'll pay this guy to bring out his cows, and you can see cows underneath our solar panels. It's a fun time. Here's a image of one of his cows scratching its head on a steel I-beam because so many people are afraid that cows are going to destroy everything. This is probably a 600, 800 pound cow. We're just kind of chilling with the steel I-beam. That's I think back in the medieval ages, we learned that steel beats flesh and bone, and I think it remains the case today. These steel I-beams are embedded 7 to 9 feet in the ground. They are not going to move. When we have our solar array was built to handle 145 mile an hour winds, which is a category 3 hurricane. Last time you heard about a hurricane in Colorado. But that means when 10 mile an hour windstorms come through, they rattle our solar array system far more than that cow scratching its neck or back on the steel I-beams. And we've clocked 80 mile an hour winds out on our site. Colorado Agrivoltaic Learning Center does so much more too than bringing the agricultural aspect. We do a lot of teaching, just as I'm hopefully getting across some tidbits to you all right now. We teach kids. We have K through 12 students that come out. We have 2 dedicated staff that work with students to go through different types of curriculum to learn more about soil science, to learn about the economics, to learn more about civics within a solar array. It's always a fun time having students come out, and then they get to apparently play with worms in the solar array. We have good parties. There we go. We have good parties out on the out in the solar array every year. We have an end of season party that's September 13th this year. We have a pollinator palooza day this coming Saturday where we bring out families to come out, learn more about insects in the solar array. Solar arrays are simply space. There's space that could be used. There's shade, and when it's hot, people want to be in that shade. So it's all figuring out how can we have fun in a solar array? How can we have jobs in a solar array? How can we just make it more useful? And that all falls back to the third time I'm going to say this. We just have to build solar arrays right. and we got to do it right now so that people in the future can use it. That's planning, designing, and building for solar arrays, where you think about accessibility, you improve wire management, and you don't screw up the land during construction. And then you're going to have a lot better chances for having agricultural activities involved in a solar array within the first couple of years after the construction, through the 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years that solar array is going to be in existence. So appreciate y'all taking your time or listening to me. I will be happy to answer questions later on. Thanks much. Stop share.
Thank you, Byron. We did have one question about the site itself, which I think those are helpful to answer right away while we have the pictures in our mind. They were wondering about the space between the rows of between the poles and between the panels. And then also about soil preparation. Was there any operation, mechanized use of tractors between the panels as well, besides soil preparation?
So we are at 36% ground cover ratio. That our panels are the from middle row is 17 foot on center. When the panels are flat, it's 11 feet from edge to edge. When they're fully tilted, it's 14 feet from edge to edge. Ground prep for the vegetable production, it was ripped and tilled, turning the hay field into a vegetable field. But oftentimes, if like when I go back to my comment about not destroying the land during construction of it, like maybe had we destroyed it in knowing that we were going to have vegetable production out there, but then the vegetable farmers skipped out on us and they wouldn't work with us, then we would have just had a destroyed field. Whereas if you don't grade it and you still have solid vegetation, and maybe you don't get a vegetable farmer, but maybe a rancher comes in, you still have that vegetation available.
Perfect. Thanks for that clarification, Byron, and the wonderful presentation. We're excited now to have Peter Schmitt from US Solar share about their experiences with agrivoltaics, and stay tuned for a great question and answer session at the end as well. So, yep, if you could pull up your slides, Peter.
Yeah, working on it. 1 second. Let's see what we got here. All right, I can no longer see you, but hopefully you can see me and the screen. Could someone verbally tell me they can see a screen, since I can no longer see
Can't
any
see
video?
the slides yet.
You cannot?
We cannot.
Interesting. 1 second. Let me try a second time. How about now?
Something is coming up. Yep. Now we can see. Yep. We see the
Perfect.
title slide.
Perfect. See, that's why I was going to do the auditory check. So my name is Peter Schmitt. I have the unfortunate pleasure of following Byron because in many ways, what we're doing at US Solar right now is an earlier version of what Byron's been working on. We have more sites, but they are certainly not as far developed in terms of the amount of research and exposure that Byron has. And candidly, a lot of what we've done on some of our sites has been taken from Byron. So when he's talking about educating folks, it's not just the youth. Some of us are in our mid-30s and still learning from him as well. But I've been working at US Solar for about 8.5, 9 years now. And just because I have to get this one out of the way for our comms team, US Solar, we're based out of Minneapolis, Minnesota. We operate, though, in a variety of states around the country. We are primarily a community solar development company. So a lot of projects that are in the, call it 7 to 40 acre range. Minnesota particularly, we have a lot of projects that are very similar to Byron's, a lot of 1 megawatt AC projects, 1.4 megawatt DC. We also have a large presence in Illinois, and now we're actually getting under construction in Colorado. So I'm actually hoping to work with the Colorado Agrivoltaic Learning Center on some of their work as we get projects up and running in Colorado. It's been a nice side bit of networking I can do with Byron. But one thing that we've focused on for a long time as a company, other than our very first project when it was a little bit too early before this kind of got into it, is we've been focusing on both agrivoltaics and as it's kind of been split, ecovoltaics in our development. So Agrivoltaics might already be a new word for some folks. Generally it's the combination of some form of agriculture with solar production, some kind of dual use. But in the last couple of years, there's been even a little bit more of a subdivision from there to include ecovoltaics, which is more on the pollinator friendly habitat, prairie habitat, beekeeping side of things. We generally at US Solar like to think of this as more of a big tent where both of these are both under the umbrella of agrivoltaics, but just putting that out there as a term you might hear in some circles to hear this difference. But from early on, US Solar is committed to, at a minimum, having pollinator habitat, kind of this ecovoltaic side on our arrays. I think Ross Abbey is on the call, and he was one of the big pioneers here in Minnesota, where we have worked with the Board of Water and Soil Resources to create a pollinator-friendly scorecard for our solar arrays. It's a voluntary program, but essentially it's trying to guide you into having a certain percentage of different plant variety. You get a variety of points across the scoreboard. Some of them are for having flowering varieties throughout the season. Some of them are having a certain number of flowering varieties. Some are having a certain number of grass varieties. There's a variety of ways to get to, and once you get to 70 points, you become adequate pollinator habitat. Once you get to 90 points, you are exceeding and becoming exceptional pollinator habitat, and we've always sought to have the kind of that exceptional rating. But over the years, this is something that we're very proud of. So Minneapolis is our home, or Minnesota is our home market. Minneapolis is our headquarters. And when you look at agrivoltaics nationwide, this is coming from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory's INSPIRE project that tracks agrivoltaic projects across the country. Minnesota really stands out on their scorecard in large part because of pollinator-friendly habitat and beekeeping. And a lot of these 253 projects are US Solars. So we have, about 105, 110 operational projects. About 95 to 100 of them are in Minnesota. So of this 253, we're representing a pretty big number. And this is something Minnesota's really proud of. We're in the middle of the country. We're often seen as flyover territory, but this is something that we've done really, really well. And it's been something we've been able to bring to other parts of the country. And it doesn't make sense everywhere. If I'm in New Mexico or Arizona, those are not prairie areas. So we're not seeing prairie habitat there. We're seeing other forms of agrivoltaics. But in the Midwest, which was very predominantly prairie, this is something that we've wanted to invest in and make sure we're bringing back as we're having a lot of habitat loss, particularly monarchs are a big deal in Minnesota. We were a big part of the discovery of the monarch migration from north to south. Kind of the first set of tracked monarchs came from Minnesota that were found in Mexico City. So prairie habitat and pollinator habitat is a really big deal in Minnesota, and this is a big part of what we at US Solar have been working on. So again, pollinator-friendly habitat, we've talked about the Board of Water and Soil Resources. We've also been participating in research with a variety of different groups. I am not a scientist or a farmer, unfortunately. Byron looks great in a cowboy hat. We're going to do a little photo shoot sometime where I'm going to give him a bow tie. He's going to give me a cowboy hat. But I'm a developer by trade, but I like to partner with folks who know a lot more than me. It's the best way to do work. And some of those groups have been, the Land Institute. We've worked with them on some perennial sunflower crops. Monarch Joint Venture, who's doing some really innovative work with drones to be able to quickly and efficiently indicate the health of pollinator habitat, to identify weed seeds and weed plants within arrays, to see overall health of pollinator habitat. They're actually doing some really great on-site demos if you're in Minnesota in the next couple of weeks. The Great Plains Institute has been an excellent nonprofit partner for us, who's not only been advocating for these kind of agrivoltaic and dual use features, but also working with communities to say, hey, for your solar permitting rules, let's make sure that you have these kind of things built in. So in the same way that Byron's on the Planning Commission and can help shape how solar projects are received in his community, Great Plains Institute has essentially been doing that for the region, for the Midwest. So they have essentially template permitting guides in Minnesota, Iowa, Illinois, Wisconsin, Indiana, that are helping to make sure that if solar is coming to a community, that they have these kind of considerations in mind. And we've been partnering with them to kind of go in lockstep with them, because we believe in this as the way that solar should be developed. NREL, very similar to Byron, we have NREL researchers on our site. Again, they haven't been there for as long, but we've liked working with them. And then the University of Minnesota, I'm working with Brad Hines and Sabrina. We're going to get some cattle on a site soon, I promise. But we've also been working with University of Minnesota Twin Cities Extension to place farmers and researchers on some of our sites here as well. And as long as we have this pollinator habitat, this prairie habitat, we've also wanted to make sure to provide opportunities for other folks to provide commercial beekeeping services. So we have a handful of our sites that have commercial bees and beehives on their sites. And then we also, in addition to that, have some sites that are more focused on native bee health. We were really lucky here in Minnesota, at the University of Minnesota, to have a renowned national bee expert, Dr. Marla Spivak, who talked about the health and needs of solitary bees, who are the ones doing the majority of pollination around the country and whose habitat is the most at risk. Minnesota's state bumblebee is the rusty patch bumblebee, and that's something, again, we're quite proud of. But their habitat has been under threat for a long time. So on some of our sites, we're also providing native bee habitat in addition to our pollinator habitat to ensure we're creating these opportunities for those communities to thrive. And those provide more than just ecological benefits. Some of those things also allow us to have better connections in the community where we can find local beekeepers. And then selfishly, as a person who enjoys food and drink, they also have the byproducts of honey and beer. So one thing we've enjoyed from one of our sites is we've partnered with a beekeeper here from Bear Honey in Minnesota. And community solar is a form of solar where we have residential and commercial subscribers who benefit from our array. It's not just going straight to the utility. And we happen to have a brewery just down the road, Lupulin Brewery, who we donated some honey to, and we could rip off a Pink Floyd album, if you might recognize it, to create this Dark Side of the Sun solar beer. So as a beer drinker, this has been a real big exciting thing for me, but it's just kind of, I mean this not just tongue in cheek, but to showcase there's a variety of products that come from agrivoltaics. Byron talked a lot about it already, and you'll see some of that in my slides as well, but there's so much that you can produce from these solar arrays in addition to electricity. I was lucky. I just got back from Germany and Austria last week, where I've lived in the past, and I visited a solar vineyard where I got to drink wine from grapes that were harvested under an array. And there's so much opportunity here that's untapped, but US solar is kind of growing into that. So in addition to pollinator habitat, we also have grazing. As Byron mentioned, this has become kind of the gold standard, or maybe not gold standard, but easiest standard. I don't know if that makes it gold or not, but it's easiest standard for vegetation management. And this has been really useful for us in a variety of ways. One, again, this has been a way for us to connect with community, but on a very base level, this has been an excellent safety element for our projects. Prairie and pollinator habitat, or prairie habitat in general, is normally fire generated. And we obviously aren't going to let fire rip through our arrays. My operations team would not be happy with me, to say the least, nor would our insurance providers or our financiers. So sheep provide a really useful service in removing the thatch buildup as a prairie matures. This isn't necessarily something we do right away on our sites. We usually let a couple years of our sites mature first. We spot treat. We make sure the prairie is coming in strong and healthy first. But once we get into year 3 or year 4, and again, I'm not saying this is the way you have to do it. This is the way how we approach it. Is we then start using sheep in years 3 and beyond to remove that thatch buildup and remove some of that the overgrown vegetation. Our arrays are a little bit shorter than Byron's, but very similar, where our leading edge is about 36 inches as a natural base case. Our torque tubes are at about 6 feet. We're experimenting with maybe something higher in the future, but our general standard design is a torque tube at 6 feet with a 36-inch leading edge. And part of that is happenstance. We're in Minnesota. We get a lot of snow. Part of it is intentionally with pollinator habitat in mind that usually gets up to about 36 inches in height, where we're not having shading on the modules. So sheep have been an excellent fit for us, kind of hand in glove. And we work with 2 different partners right now. So one is Cannon Valley Grazers, Arlo Hark and Josie Tropel out of Northfield, Minnesota. It's in the southeastern part of the state. They are awesome. They've been huge advocates. Arlo has an awesome mustache. I know it's a thing you have to just shout it on the side. But they've been an excellent advocate for us. They show up at events. They produce meat for us for events. And then Josie's also running a company called Bayl, B-A-Y-L, which uses the wool from the sheep to produce socks, hats, sweaters, blankets, and other products. And she also then dyes using native plants from these sites. So there's some really cool opportunities there. And then one of our other ones is we happen to have a farmer landowner who was a shepherd, and she had 4 paddocks of sheep. This was early on, before solar grazing had really taken off in the United States. She removed sheep from one of her paddocks because she wasn't making enough money to justify it. And she had us put solar in that 4th paddock as a way to support the rest of the farm. excellent use for everyone all around. But then we realized, as we kind of learned about the American Solar Grazing Association and solar grazing in general, we could work with her where we added in an extra livestock gate at the back of the facility, and we could just open it up and she could bring her sheep back on. They already had their stall there, they had water there. It was just another way for her to rotate sheep around, have feed year round, while also making an additional significant amount of income on her land. So that was a really good, mutual benefit for us. And we mentioned we'll meet, and then on the horizon for us, we don't have a cattle project yet. I've been talking to Brad for years and just kind of fanboying over what's going on in Morris, Minnesota. If you haven't got to check out Morris, Minnesota, please do so. There's a lot of really cool stuff there. But we're looking at both in Minnesota, down in Oklahoma, and in Colorado, figuring out how to make cattle happen. Byron made a great point of, we hear sheep are great. Honestly, if I could choose, I'd maybe choose sheep overall. They're just much easier animals to work with for grazing, but that's just not the reality of the livestock market in the United States. And we want to meet farmers where they are. I don't want to force farmers to raise sheep if they don't want to. I want to support opportunities for farmers to do what they want to do in terms of agriculture. And right now, and in the recent past, it has been extensively cattle. And from a developer's perspective, Byron's also a developer in-house in his own way, but he's also a farmer, where I am purely a developer. And it's a fight internally. Getting sheep on the first time, I had to talk to insurance and finance and operations to get them comfortable with the idea of sheep. And sheep are quite a bit smaller and less risky than cattle. And I mean that in a way where I don't think cattle are actually risky at this point. In talking to Brad and doing a lot of research on this, however, they are perceived as riskier animals than sheep. And that is, again, I'm now going through the same fights again with insurance and finance and operations on cattle. And then there's a fun little parenthetical in here. We're working on a project out in California where not only are there cattle, but there might also be bull elk, which are a whole different, maybe a whole different animal, so to say, where we're trying to figure out what do we have to do with our antlers, how do we have to change potentially height elements, because I am convinced at this point with cattle, you don't dramatically need to change the height of your array. Bull elk, I'm not sure yet. I need more bull elk. If there are bull elk experts on the call, please reach out. I would love to hear your thoughts. That's something we've done on the grazing side. And then these are pictures from a grazing event that we hosted on one of our sites. We had folks come out. We had a bunch of sheep. There's a lamb on the side. There was a surprise. This was not lambing season on it. This was late June, early July. But we showed up and there was a surprise lamb that happened to come out the morning of our shearing event. So that made it in. But we had about 500 sheep on this site that we had pulled in from a few different areas to have shorn, and we now control this wool that we'll be using for products in the near future. And then the last piece we have is very similar to what Byron was talking about with vegetable production, but with one caveat, where we now have our first crop producing site here in Minnesota, just northwest of Minneapolis in Big Lake, Minnesota, where we are partnering with Big River Farms, who is an amazing partner. And they're a nonprofit here that does a variety of things around food in general. So if you heard any of the news about Minnesota having free breakfast and lunch for students, no matter your income, everywhere in the state, that was an initiative that was led by the Food Group, who is the parent of Big River Farms. They have a variety of areas around food security, eliminating food deserts, providing food opportunities. But this program with Big River Farms, what they do is they are training farmers on how to become farmers, or training folks on how to become farmers. And specifically, they're focusing on emerging farmers, which they define as underrepresented groups within agriculture. This could be women, this can be immigrants, this can be people of color. But this is essentially training folks on how to grow, what they should be watching for in terms of disease, how to connect to markets, how to deal with insurance, how to deal with the paperwork involved with farming. There's so much that goes into starting up a farm, right? And one of the problems they realized as they were going through these incubator programs, and they train farmers for 2 years on their home farm, and then they'd graduate from that program and want them to go start their own farms. And a lot of those farmers were having a lot of trouble securing land, or at a minimum, securing land for longer than 1 year, and longer than 1 year on not really shitty terms. They were getting taken advantage of. They didn't necessarily know the system. They learned what they could from Big River Farms, but it's the difference between the classroom and the real world, right? So a lot of them wanted to do organic practices for farming, which requires 3 years of paperwork and soil prep, but we're having year-to-year leases, and it's really hard to make that investment in that case. So a lot of farmers were kind of fizzling out. They were getting frustrated and kind of giving up and going back to other sectors. So we got the opportunity to work with them. We were connected through Rob Davis, who used to be at Fresh Energy, then was at Connexus, and is now at the company formerly known as Emirates. I don't know what they've rebranded as anymore. You can put that in the chat if you know it. But the connection was such that, we can provide land for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, no problem, and for free. And it allowed the security for farmers to come and invest in the soil. And importantly for us as well, we have sites all over the state, which means we can kind of meet farmers closer to where they were. It's maybe not the farm they live on, but it's not driving 2 hours to a site. It's maybe driving half hour to a site, which provided, again, just more opportunities for folks to grow. So this is Stephen on the slide. He and his twin brother Simon are from Kenya. The Kenya growing season is different than Minnesota's, which is how we ended up in Bigger River Farms program and learning about the Minnesota growing season and markets. But he and his brother and their families are one of now about 6 farming groups that farm on our 1 megawatt facility in Big Lake. And we're trying to figure out what do we learn from this to then grow up out of it. And much as I mentioned earlier, none of these things happen in a vacuum or by themselves. So I did list some of the partners here on the bottom. They're very similar to the groups we heard earlier, but we are always open to more partners. If you want to do research on our sites, we're really open to that. If you want to try something on our sites, like I'm not a farmer by trade. I'm learning a lot, but I don't necessarily have all these good ideas. So I rely heavily on going to events, meeting with farmers, and having them tell me what they want to do, and then figuring that out. And that's kind of how these type of things come together. Picture on the left here is maybe minor for some, but this was a really cool opportunity here in Minnesota where, coming back to the Board of Water and Soil Resources, a different program that they run is called the Water Quality Certified Farm Program. This is for farms. It doesn't mean you can't have pesticides, but it's saying, how do you have responsible pesticide management on your site? How do you have buffer lands? How are you treating your water? How are you doing crop rotations? How are you doing cover crops? And there's a certification involved with that you can use. It says, yes, my soil is up to snuff. I am following these practices. Great. Our Big Lake site, where we have farmers on it, is the first solar facility in Minnesota to ever receive this certification. And what this means is that our farmers can market under this moniker. It was, it's a little bit different from both sides because it was a little bit uncharted territory, but I really want to give credit to Dan Shaw and their team over at Bowser for being open to talking to us about how to mix these kind of agricultural and solar elements. So that's really cool. On the right, this is an example of what one of our sites looks like, or one of our rows looks like, just to get some of the questions out of the way that we saw earlier. Our center design in Minnesota is a little bit wider than Colorado's because we're farther north. So our post to post is about 19 or 20 feet. This particular site's, I think, 19 and a half feet. And then tip to tip on the modules is about 14 feet, or 13 and a half to 14 feet. So we're a little bit wider. And again, that's because our sun angle is just a little bit different. And our module types will change year to year. So this is also important. I haven't mentioned this, I don't think. This is a retrofit site. So this is a site that existed since 2017. It was a potato farm. We built it. We put in prairie habitat. And then we undid some of the established prairie in 2023 to put in these crops. So there is still prairie habitat where there's not crops, but it was an interesting dance to undo something that was also good. And also, you can kind of see this on the right side. These are monofacial modules because that's what was in the market in 2017. So there's a white back sheet on the back of these modules. So light doesn't go through as much of these modules as some of the newer ones. And that's a different element for new sites we can talk about. But we're learning a lot from this site that we can then use to apply to future sites, is how I would say it. Byron talked about having a tractor on his site. So far, we've been using a walk behind on this one. And part of that is you can kind of see in the back of the left picture, there's a very irritating drive shaft in the middle of the row. This is, from a solar perspective, awesome. This is a company called ATI. It's a tracking group that essentially you can use a single motor to move 17 rows of modules east to west. It's incredibly efficient. It's incredibly useful. It doesn't fail very often. It is an awesome product. I don't want to bash ATI for their product in this sense. They are an awesome product. From an agrivoltaic perspective, they've been a little bit challenging in terms of having to prep sites because we have something right in the middle of the row where you can't necessarily turn around a full-size tractor, so you have to kind of back in and then till. So this is something we're trying to figure out, how do we deal with on future sites. But for this retrofit site, we're making it work by using either backing equipment down the rows and pulling it out, or using a walk behind in this case. As Byron mentioned, water is incredibly important. This particular site used to be a potato farm. It's very sandy soil. We've had to add a lot of organic matter to it to build it up. And also, when we started this project, we didn't have water on site. We didn't have a well, so we were bringing in water. That has since changed. We'll talk about that in a second, but we do have drip irrigation for crops. So things just to learn that we've learned. Again, we're just now entering. This is the end of our second year, essentially, of growing. Things we've done that have gone really well. We've had beneficial shade come in, so we've seen boosts from several crops anecdotally in this first year. Or well, not for me anecdotally, there is science behind it. I just am the anecdotal side of things. But we've seen much better performance on oregano, for example. Our first year we had really wet spring followed by a really dry summer. So our test plot, our control plot bolted pretty quickly. It just got really stressed. But under the modules, we had a bumper crop. It went really well. And for a lot of our, so we've kind of two elements of our site. We have the site with Seaman and Simon where they're growing for market. We also have NREL and the University of Minnesota doing research. Our research plot was donating its crops to the local food shelf. So we could donate a lot of extra food to the food shelf from this facility. We've also managed to host tours, again, not as organized yet as Byron. We're not that kind of, we don't have that kind of cadence yet, but we've hosted a couple of big events. We actually have one with farmers, specifically farmers, tomorrow or Thursday. I think it's on Thursday. What we're trying to do here, we can't fly everyone out to Byron to have them stand on a site and show them what this looks like. We need kind of multiple examples around the country, and we are the first site in Minnesota to do this. And it's allowing us to bring farmers to us and say, hey, you can make this happen. So oftentimes when we talk to farmers, we say, hey, we want you to continue growing crops underneath the array. They say where or how, or that's crazy. Then you get them to stand on the site and they can kind of see how much land there is. And it's a lot different conversation from there. So that's been really successful for us. It's also been motivating for U.S. solar employees. I know this is probably a minor part in the overall scheme of agrivoltaics for farmers, but it's exciting for farmers, a lot of opportunities for farmers. It's also exciting for the people working on the solar side of it. I have a lot of folks on like my GIS team who don't often make it out to our sites. They're looking at a lot of maps, they're looking at a lot of data, and they're a little bit disconnected from the site in that sense. But if I can bring them out to the site and have a harvest day or a planting day or even a weeding day. We had folks go out and just weed for 4 hours. The farmers loved it. They had free labor from us. It got us out of the office for 4 hours. And it was a really interesting touch point for folks who maybe don't get to be out on our sites very often. It was really motivating. I've actually had 3 employees since in the recent months come up to me recently after they've been hired and tell me that they came to US Solar in part because of our agrivoltaic commitments. And again, this is anecdotal data. It hasn't been replicated in other companies, but this is something that motivates people beyond farming. There are not many farmers in the United States. That does not mean there are not people that are invested in farming and interested in farming. So that's been a really big success for us. We're also working on creating an agrivoltaic specific position within the company, which will kind of help us with these connections. Right now, it's kind of me, but I also have a lot of other hats that I have to wear. And it's just generally helped a lot of the collaboration between farmers, developers, operations staff. So for example, on this one, we ended up having a lot of ground squirrels on one of our sites, and they got into our transformer equipment. And the farmers let us know so we could get out there and handle that quicker and put out live traps, which the farmers helped us monitor. It also helped the farmers because the ground squirrels were inherently also eating some of the crops. So we learned about it faster, we could address it faster, and everyone benefited from this in the end. So that was a big pro for us. It kind of saved everyone a lot of time. The challenges that we've had is, I mentioned, we have a drive shaft down the middle of our rows. That's not ideal, but this was a retrofit site. Our panel height was set because of that. We only had a single gate at the time, and we only had one electrical source as well. We only had a little bit of house power if you wanted to power different equipment or whatever else. Starting up a farm from scratch also takes a lot of work. We had to build storage sheds and pack sheds and just get equipment in general. And as I mentioned, we didn't have water at the time. And then also, both from the solar side and the farming side, we had to deal with insurance questions, finance questions. Farmers generally carry their own insurance, but most farming insurance doesn't necessarily contemplate solar. and most solar insurance doesn't contemplate farmers. So we had to kind of bridge that gap and have a lot of conversations. That's been ultimately successful, but it was an extra challenge. And then some of our farmers are still coming from farther away. We're working on finding more farmers that are closer, but we're still pretty new at this, and we're trying to build our Rolodex of farmers. So we're still trying to find the right fit there and who's closest and who's farther away. Many of these challenges are going to be addressed this year and next year. We've donated money to put in a well. We've added a second gate. We've worked to advocate for more farmers so we can grow the number who are closer. A lot of these things are still coming along, but it's not I don't want to paint this as a 1-year fix or a 1-year operation. This is something you're building over many years to make this happen. These are some pictures from the events that we've had. This is Kazua Berry on the right, who's from Big River Farms. She's amazing. I've gotten to work with her on a variety of projects. She also used some straw from a straw bale house I was building on her garlic patch at Big River Farms. It's been a really great relationship. She's just incredibly passionate and positive about the future of both farming and agrivoltaics specifically. And these aren't quite as professional as some of Byron's signs, but like creating educational materials. I came from environmental education before this as well. And it's important to be able to talk and tell these stories. And that's something we're working on as well. We need to get a few better pictures, but labeling different plants, whether it's you pick berries, I love that idea. I will definitely come out to Colorado at some point to do some youth pick berries, but finding ways to do different crops types, meet people where they are. We do actually have some berries on our site now. For the first time, we transplanted them from a different agrivoltaic site that was not work anymore. So we now have berries in addition to our crops on the site. And again, just kind of coming back to it, we've looked at why agrivoltaics matters from a solar side. From the solar industry side, we have to manage our vegetation anyway. It might as well be in a way that's also beneficial to farming communities and farmers. It builds trust in those communities. You're not hearing the same arguments of you're taking farmland out of production. If I'm saying, actually, I'm going to bring in farmers and grow crops. Maybe it's not going to be corn and soy. There are some agrivoltaic arrays that are corn and soy, but that's not our approach so far. But it's building trust in that way. It's helping with infrastructural longevity, whether it's helping cool the panels, whether it's dealing with stormwater in a better way. There's just a lot of opportunities that are better than turf grass, that are better than gravel with agrivoltaics. As I mentioned with the ground squirrels and some other areas, having eyes on the site more often. A traditional solar site has a camera on it, but it doesn't necessarily have someone on site every day. And not that a farmer is on site every day either, but you have more frequent occurrences of someone on the site to see if something's going wrong. And that can save you a mobilization cost. It can save you time of equipment being down or non-operational. So there's a lot of benefits there. And also it provides us opportunities from a policy perspective to be more hand in hand with the agriculture industry. This particular federal administration is maybe not the most beneficial for us for that. The USDA came out today saying they're no longer going to support solar and wind on farms, which is a massive mistake in terms of freedom to farm, freedom for farmers to do what they want to do with their land. However, outside of that, there are a lot of really good conversations happening between farming communities, farmers, and solar developers. I'm not saying that every solar developer is a good actor either. That's never going to be the case, but there are a lot of solar developers that want to do the right thing, that want to work with farming communities, that want to do this kind of thing, and just need a little bit of help and a nudge and policy help to get them to it. And I think there's a lot of opportunity there. And US Solar is working on some agrivoltaic policies here in Minnesota. We have an Oklahoma cattle project that's relying on a recently passed agrivoltaics bill in Oklahoma. I know Colorado has a lot of agrivoltaics incentives and programs that they're working on. Policy isn't always the leader. Sometimes it's pulling up the back of the pack to make sure we're all kind of doing the right thing, but there's a lot of opportunity there. For farmers, we've talked about the shepherd in our case, who's getting additional income from doing the exact same thing they were doing before. It's continued production, whether that's crops, whether that's meat, whether that's land services. It's beneficial shade. Byron talked about the livestock being under the shade and hanging out. The workers want to do the same thing. If it's 95 degrees and humid and you can stand under the shade or in the direct sun, you're going to stand under the shade to do your harvest. It's just a lot better all around. And also in the case of the vineyard I mentioned earlier, there's a little bit of hail protection as well, right? Hail is a huge deal for crops. And if you can provide some protection where the solar industry is eating the hail damage and not the crops, that's a real big win as well. Then for the environment, we talked about soil quality and retention for pollinator sites particularly, but also from correct cropping rotations. water quality and retention. You get a lot of pollinators and birds and wildlife. There's a lot of good research from the Inspire website around tracking wildlife around these sites. And it's just generally keeping the dollars more local in a lot of ways. So those things are all really important for us. This is why we're committed to it now and in the future. And we're just trying to figure out how to scale up. And I'll stop there because I probably talked a little bit too long since we're an hour in, but here we are. So happy to answer questions. Thank you. And let's see if I can figure out how to stop sharing. Oof, I had the same problem earlier. Stop sharing on this side. Hooray.
Yep, perfect. Thank you, Peter. Thanks for sharing your inspiring work with agrivoltaics and projects that are going here in Minnesota and across the country. And again, thank you to Byron for sharing about their work in agrivoltaics. It's great to see both all parts of stages of the development in these types of projects. With that, we will take questions from the audience. Just throw them into the chat here as you think of them. And if not, I have many questions of my own for Peter and Byron. But our first question here is, well, a note that you are both great evangelists for agrivoltaics, and that you've really reiterated the value that they bring to a community. And the question is, who pays for this value? The farmer, the PPA purchasers, tax break? Again, who pays for the value is the question for both of you.
I'd say every site's going to be different. Who paid in my circumstance at Jack's Solar Garden? I did. I didn't get tax breaks. I didn't even use our tax credits. I still have $500,000 tax credits I'm sitting around on. So folks, I understand having tax credits is really useful for the solar industry to make some more money. But I mean, I went from having a 5-year payback period if I had tax credits to now I have a 10-year payback period. That's not great, but hey, still, I'm going to pay off the bank and I'll have 10 more years of production. And then after that, I'm going to re-energize the system and still have money thereafter. So there's opportunities for the solar industry to take a little bit themselves and opportunities for the government to give a little bit. But there's opportunities for local communities to say what they want in their communities. And if you're not providing what they want, then you may not be able to build what you want.
I'll add a couple of notes. So some of this is also market and policy driven. And to that, Byron's making the point there that it's going to be different everywhere. But some examples I can give, the Massachusetts market pays a pretty penny for you to put agrivoltaics on your facility. It's a lot of paperwork to make sure that you're actually meeting the criteria to get that money. But they're paying, I think it's 10 or 15 cents a kilowatt to additional revenue on top of the energy to put in agrivoltaics. So that's been a huge program on the East Coast to do that. For us, Big Lake, our site, we retrofit it. We already paid for it. We looked at it as an opportunity. Something we talk about internally, essentially, with pollinator habitat, we look at it as a cost neutral opportunity. It's more expensive seed up front, but you have fewer visits for maintenance long term. And we've seen that play out. We have sites that are built in 2017, 2018, where now we're only having one vegetation maintenance site visit per year, as opposed to if you have turf grass, you're mowing 3, 4, 5 times, depending on the conditions in any given year. So you have that lower mobilization cost. So that's an opportunity. And candidly, in some cases, it doesn't really matter who wants to pay for it. It becomes the requirement to get the permit. And that's kind of the direction I would say a lot of things are pushing is if you don't put in agrivoltaics, you just don't get to build it. But this is something we did talk about for a long time, because in a wholesale market, in some of the bigger projects, those ones that are 1,000 acres, 2,000 acres, they're competing in a wholesale market where every dollar of build costs matter. Every dollar across the project matters. And, I've had many questions come to me that are, well, if you elevate your array by 2 feet, for example, who's paying for that? How are you competing against a project that doesn't have that? And that's a good question, but sometimes you have buyers that are looking for those extra benefits. Again, sometimes you just don't get a project if you don't build it that way. So there are those opportunities. I would love it. I would love money to rain from the sky. That's always a great idea, but you're never going to grant money your way into a perfect situation. You're going to have a mixture of some grants, some carrots, some policy sticks. that are going to force, that the industry to move that way. And I would argue right now we are in a spot where you're seeing policy shift towards the direction of requiring agrivoltaics as a way to move forward. And I think it's generally fine, with an asterisk saying, how prescriptive are you going to be? How strict are you going to be? I've seen some things that are saying, well, if you have animals that are only grazing to get rid of thatch and not for primary meat production, that you don't count. And I think that's kind of nonsense. But if you create a reasonably large tent where you're saying you can pick from this menu of options to be an agrivoltaic facility, do it across the site. If you want to ask for an exemption for a specific reason, do so. If it's marginal Superfund site land or whatever, and you can't grow crops on it, you can have an exemption. But as long as you have that big enough tent, I think that's okay. But I don't think you're going to see a lot of money raining from the sky to make this happen. I think it's going to be more of a, we started early and now we're just going to require it.
It only rains money in Massachusetts, apparently, right? I know Colorado is in a $2 billion deficit right now, so fat chance on anybody out here expecting our state government to hand out dollars on it. But I really like I like your point on competing at the utility scale. So folks are competing to provide the lowest cost electricity, but when you look at the RFPs that utilities are putting out or governments are putting out within there, those RFPs are only valuing electricity costs. Maybe some on, do you have access to land, or do you have experience building these things before? But the main factor that they're selecting between companies to build the projects on is dollar per kilowatt hour. There's nothing in there related to land stewardship whatsoever. If we were able to work with our IOUs, we're able to invest our own utilities, our rural electric co-ops, and say, hey, look, put into your evaluation criteria and make it public in your RFPs that land stewardship is valuable, that agrivoltaics is valuable. Put a 20% marker on there. Now companies will be on the same level and be competing together on it. And then everything is fair. But when you're one company trying to compete against everybody else, then you fall into the trap that Peter was talking about. It makes it hard.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's the one I forgot to talk about. Is it the incentive doesn't have to be monetary, for example. Massachusetts is doing it purely on a dollar per kW benefit. But like Illinois, for example, to get selected, they're giving you an extra point in their scoring criteria if you have an agrivoltaics plan. I can quibble with whether they're being strict enough on seeing that agrivoltaics plan as opposed to just checking a box saying you'll do it eventually. But you can do it that way. You can do something where you maybe cut forward in a queue if you have the correct partnerships and plans. Those are opportunities that I think are still a little bit unchecked. I have seen, again, this check mark of like, I'm totally going to do agrivoltaics, therefore giving this point, that I think need to probably have a little bit more robustness to them. But that's another way to incentivize agrivoltaics that is a non-monetary incentive.
Thank you both for your 2 cents on that question. Similar question, are there federal or state schemes or financial support mechanisms given to farmers to embark on agrivoltaics? And additionally, how is electricity generated usually remunerated in the US? Maybe Brad can also jump in if he has anything on that question.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm happy to start in a couple of spots. So there was a program that was targeted towards research for cattle grazing specifically on sites. I'm unsure if that program, the LASSO program was what it's called. I'm unsure if that program ended up moving forward under this administration, but that one's one that did exist. There have been a series of DOE grants for agrivoltaics to do a variety of different research that I know Brad's also been part of at the University of Minnesota-Morris. So that's kind of that side of things. In terms of the electricity generated being remunerated, it depends on what part of the market you're playing in. So community solar, for example, which is a lot of what US Solar does, is very state policy driven. So in Minnesota, it's been historically with Xcel Energy. Xcel Energy is obliged to buy the electricity we produce at a certain price, regardless of when we produce it. And then there are credits that are given to subscribers for that product. And that's a reasonably similar model to what you see in Colorado, New Mexico, Illinois, and other markets. There are nuances to that, but generally it's a state program driving up a price. In the wholesale markets for those bigger projects, there are regional markets in many cases. So Minnesota is in a group called MISO, the Mid-Continent Independent System Operator. There's also PJM on the East Coast, SPP is kind of more in the South. Texas does its own thing because Texas always does its own thing. California does its own thing because it doesn't have friends. It's working on that. But those markets are much more of a mixture of energy markets. So you can bid in just the energy value of the project. Many of those markets also have a capacity element where you can bid in capacity, and some of them also have ancillary services, whether that's spinning reserves or other benefits to the grid that can be provided by those resources. And you kind of bid into those three areas, and it's a floating price. So hopefully that covers generally what you're looking for.
I think that's wonderful, Peter. That shows that it really depends on where the hell you live. And there's no cookie cutter approach that works for solar, let alone agrivoltaics, anywhere in the country or at any scale. You got to figure it out for yourselves, but there are materials out there to help folks figure it out for yourself. On the website for Colorado Agrivoltaic Learning Center, we have some fact sheets up on where do you start. You have a farm, you have some land, you want to figure out how you can do it. You know, you got to talk to the utility, you got to talk to the county, you got to talk to a bank, you got to figure out how you're gonna finance it. Are you able to interconnect and sell it? And then are you going to get the permission to do it? And those are questions that nobody can answer easily for any given spot in the country. It just kind of depends on what your relationships are in that area.
I'll also shout out one last program before I forget. The Renewable Energy for America program, REAP, was another federal program that really helped a lot of farmers put solar on their farms, whether it was agrivoltaics or not. Unfortunately, there was an announcement this morning that funding is likely gone moving forward, but it existed for many, many years. Wasn't a recent thing. I think they invested more than $2 billion in making sure renewable energy was deployed in heavily in rural America on farms to help farmers. So that was another way to have federal supports for this kind of thing.
Yep.
Anything to add, Brad?
I do not. No. I think one of the things is that we do need like kind of the second part, we need to understand the economics of it, how it benefits farmers, and including both the solar energy production as well as either crops or livestock under the panels, and how that can economically benefit the farmers. There's not much out there about that.
Yes, great point. So then for all of you, I guess, in your experience, have you seen opposition from local residents decrease when agrivoltaics is introduced as opposed to traditionally designed systems?
I have a favorite story on this one that I'd love to start with. So this is going back to pollinator habitat, but years ago, this is back in 2018, I want to say, I was trying to permit a series of projects in kind of an area that's right on the edge of the suburban, exurban, rural split west of Minneapolis. And it was a very contentious set of applications. We conformed to all of the ordinance requirements, but it was still a very heated discussion. And this is kind of before grazing and crop production came into the United States, solar development. So we were focusing a lot on pollinator development and beekeeping. And we focused almost all of our testimony on the fact that we were privately financing prairie habitat and land restoration in the state of Minnesota, and how many acres we were doing of that and how it was going to be beneficial to surrounding landowners. And after hours of testimony, this took months, but after hours of testimony, the county board told me to stop talking about pollinator benefits and eventually approved our project because we just spent the entire time talking about how we were doing pollinator habitat and beekeeping and honey production on our site. And that's, we've come a long way since then. Now, we've actually gotten to bring in, Arlo and Josie to talk about grazing, and now we've gotten to show this example of growing crops. But that's one of my earliest ones where, like, finally we got them to not talk about the solar, because the solar really wasn't the thing they were concerned about. They were worried about like the land change and how it was moving from agriculture. And just that comment of stop talking about prairie habitat just tickles me every time.
I've been hearing across the country that at least in Virginia, folks were getting tired of the folks advertising sheep grazing and solar arrays, and they didn't want to permit projects. And you hear some of that in Colorado too. So communities are thinking more about what type of agriculture that they're interested in. So you can't just pick one type of agrivoltaics and assume it'll work everywhere, because it's community dependent. On our farm, I've had people come out to the solar array. They were like, why the hell am I visiting a solar array? I just got to drug along. I'm a +1. I don't want to see this. I don't like it. And they come out of the solar array and they see all the pictures that I just showed you all, and you see minds change. You see people being interested in it. We have rarely ever had anybody that was like, oh, I don't like this. This is boring. Even kids, like teenagers, come out here and be like, yeah, that's pretty good. I like that. There is something to seeing land being used, especially for multiple purposes, that I think is inherently in people that we enjoy seeing done. And that when we see land just being wasted, we all feel that pang deep down inside. I think bringing folks out here helps change minds. I think when we bring out solar companies to visit our solar array, it changed a lot of minds, especially in the younger and mid-level folks within the solar industry. And oftentimes we are the first solar array that many within the solar industry has ever even visited. So it's nice that we get to showcase what's possible.
I'll also add one more story. So they didn't end up making out of the call, but one of my farmer landowners wanted to attend tonight, because from the other side, we're talking about local residents, whether they oppose or not. But agrivoltaics is also now part of my outreach to landowner farmers. So one of the farmers who I wanted to attend tonight, he signed with U.S. Solar. He signed an agreement with U.S. Solar for a very large project, or comparably large project. It'll be about 1,500 acres here in Minnesota, because we were committed to agrivoltaics, because we're actually looking to expand our relationship with bigger farms and bring a variety of farming and grazing to their land. And they're, fourth generation farmers. And, when we received our water quality certification farm, designation for Big Lake, they were so excited because they also have that designation for their home farm. So it meant a lot to them. They've been dedicated to the land for a long time, and it didn't work out. The next generation had a bunch of he'd been farming for 20 years himself and was having some knee issues and back issues, and it wasn't going to work for him to keep farming for 20 more years, but they still wanted to see the land in production and taken care of. And they looked at US Solar as an opportunity to say, hey, I can make a little bit more money. I can go into retirement my own way, while making sure there's still production happening on this land. So if it's not this, you hear a lot of farmers, Byron, I don't know if you heard of this from the solar farm summit, they talked about, you grow crops or you grow houses. You grow houses is retirement. But if you don't want to grow houses, if you want to make sure your land's still doing something productive in a more agricultural sense, agrivoltaics is the way to do it. You can still make good money. You can make retirement money while providing farming opportunities for others and energy production for the grid. So I think it's both from the community perspective and from the landowner perspective, the landowner farmer perspective, that there's a lot of benefits to be had in these conversations from agrivoltaics.
Thank you both for sharing those inspiring tidbits working with communities and landowners. Maybe to circle back to the beginning, could Peter, you share a little bit about how US Solar was sold on agrivoltaics and how they believe it's the way to go now? And Byron, could you maybe just reiterate that connection from Jack's Solar Garden to now what is the Colorado Agrivoltaic Learning Center? Just talk a little bit about the journey that was and more on the outreach that happens through that center as well. So Peter, you want to go first?
Yeah, but I'll go first because Byron is going to have a lot more inspiring story to end with. I wish I had a more interesting story. I think stubbornness was honestly a big part of the US Solar part. I've heard of a lot of other companies having maybe more formalized pledges, but candidly, Ross Abbey was on the call, and then myself just kind of kept talking about pollinators and then agrivoltaics, and then just kind of saying, we're going to do this right. We're going to do this right, and then never going away. And then it just became kind of integrated into everything we've done, and we've kind of kept growing with it from there. I'm interested in now. I hadn't thought about the formal pledge part of it, but a lot of it is, you need an internal champion somewhere. If you don't have someone who's passionate about it, it's going to be tough to get it to go anywhere because the big part of the reason I'm in this industry is because I'm passionate about solar, and then I got to learn about farming, and I became passionate about farming. So you need someone who's the spark, who's the evangelist, who's the czar, however you want to call them. And US Solar has had, it started with Ross and me, and that's expanded now. We have a pretty, good group who's always coming out and volunteering on our farm days and is asking me questions about, hey, I had a farmer ask me about doing this. Can we do this? And then you kind of teach them, you bring them along, and then they can start teaching the next person. And it's kind of just has grown organically from there. And we were a small company. When I started with US Solar, I was the 6th or 7th employee, and now we're about 105. And that's still small, and it's not small anymore, but it's still small enough where you can have that kind of growth as being part of the ingrained culture where more than half the company hasn't known anything else other than agrivoltaics as part of our MO because it started small. So that's what we got from our story. I wish it was a little bit more organized, but it's worked out.
Stubborn and persistent, right there. I mean, that's how things get done. Yeah, nobody was ever like, oh, I was super carefree, just kind of sat back, didn't do much, and all these amazing things happened to me. No, it's about pushing. It's about not taking no for an answer, but it's not taking no for an answer of just going back with the exact same thing. It's about changing it, like trying to figure out, okay, they said no because of these reasons. Let me change this. I still want to do this, but now I have to keep skirting around it. And that's how Jack Solar Garden came about. Like just being persistent, asking questions, being a little bit annoying, but figuring out what people actually wanted and how we could figure out getting it done. I'd never built a business before, never owned a business, never been in the solar industry before. All I'd heard about were solar panels and how they were good for the environment, essentially, when we started Jack Solar Garden. So it was just being persistent about learning, talking to as many people as I could and figuring out what's possible. Jack Solar Garden, the business, was started at the end of 2018 after we got our contract, 20-year contract in place with Xcel Energy to tie into their grid if we could actually build the damn thing. So that's when the business started. And through 2019 and 2020, when we were figuring out, well, what is everything going to look like within the solar array, that's when the idea of the Colorado Agrivoltaic Learning Center came about, that we were doing things differently and that we think that there's an opportunity to show people, because people kept saying that they wanted to see it. And thinking at it from a business plan, like being able to hire folks, have people be educators. A nonprofit was an easier way to go, because then we could get donations to help support it, especially as we were trying to figure out what a business model for a nonprofit or for an education center could be out on the site. We're still figuring that out as we go. So roughly the same time frame that Jack Solar Garden came online in November 1st of 2020 was about the same time that the Colorado Agrivoltaic Learning Center came into being. We have a fiscal sponsor, the Colorado Nonprofit Development Center. That is a wonderful fiscal sponsor that they take 10% of the cut of whatever we pull in, but they provide HR, they provide all the tax services, they do financials, a world of different support. So if you're interested in building a nonprofit, finding an experienced fiscal sponsor might be an interesting way for others on this call to move forward with creating a learning center of some sort, where you can then seek grants and hopefully folks in the solar industry that want to kick a buck towards you. So I always find funny, Peter, I don't know your experience on this one. I think in the early years, we maybe pulled in a total of $20,000 over the course of a year and some from the solar industry when we got going. But we now have an annual budget of between $600,000 and $700,000. And we do not get donations from the solar industry anymore.
I think I asked for 10 grand for my leadership once, and that was a pretty big fight. So a lot of times more ad hoc energy.
So if others on this call want to do a nonprofit around agrivoltaics, do not go knocking on the door of the solar industry. It's going to be pulling teeth. I would recommend going to talk to your local banks. They seem to be more carefree with their money and wanting to support, or local industries that are really community-based, where they actually employ a lot of folks in the community versus, I mean, just how it is with the solar industry. You import a bunch of people to build it, and then your O&M team lives like 3 hours away and wander in. So they're not as invested in a community typically as some of the other industries that might be more interested in helping to provide donations to your nonprofit. Does that suffice, Sabrina?
For sure. Yes. Thanks for walking us through that. And then I think to round it out, if you could both just give us a vision of the future, what you're looking forward to with agrivoltaics, and what you think the future of agrivoltaics looks like. And for those in the crowd, this is your last chance to put a question in the chat, or Brad, if you have any questions, to share those with Byron and Peter. But that's what we have for you right now.
Commercial and utility scale cattle and solar arrays. That is where this will go. Those that are pushing back and fighting against it will look 20 years down the line and look to their friends and say, I always knew that was going to happen. That's where this is going to go. It's possible we can do this. It's just we need the folks that are being the stalwarts to learn that there's other ways to get things done. It doesn't have to be just no. We got to be persistent on figuring out the right ways to say it. But there's also already a whole bunch of solar arrays out there that aren't being utilized. Peter was talking about retrofitting a site up in Minnesota. There's lots of sites that we can provide access to land for people to figure out how to have their own businesses. One of my colleagues who is on the call, I believe, she's working on helping immigrant and refugee populations have access to land that they would absolutely have no way on earth of being able to purchase, let alone potentially lease. But now within solar arrays, there's an opportunity to give them a start in an agribusiness where they have access to land. They're able to use the practices and learnings that they had in their home countries here in our country, able to create food for our communities and theirs. So those are the two peak areas I look forward to seeing expand in agrivoltaics over the next 5 years.
I think I'm actually talking to you and your colleagues about that particular opportunity maybe next week. I would agree with a couple of caveats. I think cattle is absolutely the direction things are going, but I would say cattle that is not on elevated arrays or not extra elevated arrays. I think they're going to end up being at 6-7 feet tops. For the last several years, the solar industry has been bickering about needing to elevate up to 10 feet. And I think that conversation is slowly going by the wayside for the good of everybody. I think that's going to be better for the industry. I think it's going to be just fine for cattle. And that will be a really productive way to use to have dual use on cattle lands, on range lands. So I think that's going to be a big part of it. And I do think vegetable production will persist in some way, shape, or form, particularly as hail events continue to increase, as a way not only to provide beneficial shade, but also insurance protection for crops. So again, I think vegetable sites are probably the hardest thing to do right now. Still finding those farmers and finding the infrastructure is the most challenging part, much harder than livestock in many ways. But I do think there's still going to be a pretty robust vegetable production element with on-solar facilities as well. Or at least I hope so, if nothing else.
Any final thoughts, Brad?
I also expect a lot of policy to be forcing this all to happen.
Final thoughts, Brad?
I have no final thoughts. I learned a lot.
Perfect. Well, with that, we thank you all for joining. We thank Peter and Byron for joining us. And just like Brad said, I learned a lot. I hope you all came for an educational evening, but left inspired, because I know that I was. And we hope that you will check out our other webinars in this series. I put the playlist there in the chat, and this too will be up on YouTube in the near future. And we look forward to connecting next year for our agrivoltaics webinar series, and giving some updates on research around the country and projects around the country around agrivoltaics. So again, thank you all for joining, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your evening.
Thanks much, y'all.
Thank you.